Diana sat with her arms folded across her chest, her eyes distant as though lost in memories. Her voice, steady but tinged with bitterness, began to recount the events leading up to her husband's death. Oladimeji was a good man, she started, too good for his own family. He worked hard to build a life for us, starting from nothing. He wasn't an educated man, but he had drive and determination. Together, we turned his car dealership and loan businesses into something remarkable. Adamu and Musa listened in silence, their expressions grim. Musa cleared his throat. And his family? What were they like? Diana's jaw tightened. Greedy, selfish, always wanting more. Leek and Jide were the worst. No matter how much Oladimeji helped them, it was never enough. He started businesses for them, car washes, cold rooms, but they squandered everything. And when he refused to give them more, they turned on him. Her voice trembled with suppressed rage. They accused him of being selfish, greedy. They poisoned the elders' minds against him, and then they invited him to that feast. She paused, tears brimming in her eyes. I begged him not to go. I knew they were up to something, but he wouldn't listen. He thought family mattered above all else. Adamu leaned forward. What do you remember about the feast? Anything that might help us? Diana wiped her eyes, thinking carefully. I wasn't there, but I heard things afterward. Leek and Jide insisted it was a simple family gathering, but witnesses said they kept refilling Oladimeji's glass. He wasn't much of a drinker, but they encouraged him that night. Musa frowned. So, do you think they poisoned him? Diana nodded. It had to be. He came home that night, complaining of stomach pain, and by morning he was gone. The burial was rushed, too rushed. They didn't even let me see him properly. Her voice dropped to a whisper. I knew something wasn't right, but as a woman, my voice didn't matter to them. They accused me of witchcraft, shaved my head, and threw me out of the house. Everything we built, everything was taken. Adamu and Musa exchanged a glance, determination setting in. We need to start somewhere, Adamu said. Is there anyone who was close to Leek and Jide? Someone who might know more about what happened? Diana hesitated. There is one person, a maid who worked for their household. Her name is Kemi. She is just a young girl, but she might have overheard something. Where can we find her? Musa asked. Diana sighed. She lives on the outskirts of town, but be careful, Leek and Jide have eyes everywhere. If they suspect you are asking questions, they'll come for you. The journey to Kemi's house took Adamu and Musa through narrow, winding paths. The sun blazed overhead, and the dry season's heat weighed heavily on their shoulders. They arrived at a small face-me-eye box-u house surrounded by overgrown bushes. A young woman, no older than 25, answered their knock, her wary eyes scanning them. Who are you, and what do you want? She asked. Musa cleared his throat. We're not here to harm you. We're looking for Kemi. We have questions about the night Oladimeji died. Kemi's face paled. I don't know anything, she said quickly, trying to shut the door. Adamu blocked it gently with his hand. Please, we just need a moment of your time. His wife, Diana, sent us. She says you work in Leek and Jide's household. We're trying to uncover the truth. Kemi hesitated, her fear evident. I can't. They'll kill me if they find out I talk to you. We can protect you, Musa said earnestly. But we need your help. Oladimeji's spirit won't rest until the truth comes out. After a long pause, Kemi sighed and stepped aside, letting them in. All right, she said quietly. I'll tell you what I know. Inside Kemi's modest home, the atmosphere was thick with tension. She sat on a worn wooden stool, her hands fidgeting nervously as Adamu and Musa leaned forward, hanging on her every word. I was just a maid, Kemi began, her voice low and hesitant. I kept my head down, did my work, and tried to avoid trouble. But that night was different. Adamu's tone was gentle but insistent. What happened, Kemi? She took a deep breath, her eyes darting around the room as if expecting someone to overhear. The house was unusually busy. Lek and Jide were in high spirits, laughing and talking louder than usual. I thought it was strange because they never got along with Oladimeji, but they kept saying it was a night of reconciliation. Her voice dropped to a whisper. I overheard them in the kitchen. Jide said something about the special drink being ready. Lek laughed and told him to make sure Oladimeji's glass was always full. At the time, I didn't think much of it, but now, tears filled her eyes and her voice cracked. I should have said something. I should have warned him. Musa placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. You couldn't have known. But what matters now is the truth. Did you see what they used for the drink? Kemi nodded slowly, her hands trembling. It was a small bottle dark brown with no label. Jide poured it into Oladimeji's glass when no one was looking. Adamu and Musa exchanged a glance, their expressions grim. Do you remember anything else? Adamu pressed. Kemi hesitated, then nodded again. After the feast, I saw Jide sneaking out to the backyard with a tin in his hands. He buried it near the old mango tree. He looked nervous, like he didn't want anyone to see him. Her gaze shifted to the corner of the room where her small bag lay. Tea here is something else. She reached into the bag and pulled out a phone. I recorded it. Adamu and Musa's eyes widened. You recorded Jide burying the tin? Musa asked, his voice barely containing his excitement. Kemi nodded. I didn't know what he was doing, but it felt wrong. So I recorded him from the window. I thought it might be useful someday. She handed the phone to Adamu, who played the video. The grainy footage showed Jide, his face illuminated by the faint glow of a lantern, hurriedly digging a hole and placing a tin inside. His movements were quick, his eyes darting nervously toward the house. This is it, Adamu whispered. This is the proof we need.
The next day, Adamu, Musa, and Kemi gathered at Diana's house. The dimly lit living room buzzed with quiet tension as the group sat together, strategizing. Diana's face was lined with exhaustion, but her eyes burned with determination. Kemi perched nervously on the edge of her chair, clutching her phone tightly. I overheard, Kemi whispered, her voice barely audible. Jide and Lek are hosting a birthday party next Saturday at the old family residence. It'll be a big celebration, lots of guests, lots of noise. They're already hiring vendors to cater for the day. Adamu leaned forward, his brow furrowing in thought. That's perfect. If the house is crowded, it'll be easier to slip in unnoticed. But it's going to be heavily guarded, Kemi warned. Jide and Lek are paranoid. They won't let just anyone roam around. Musa smirked, a spark of mischief lighting his face. Then we won't roam, we'll serve. Diana frowned, her gaze shifting between the two men. What do you mean? We disguise ourselves as food servers, Musa explained. Big parties like this always need extra hands. If we blend in with the kitchen staff, we'll have an excuse to move around the house without raising suspicion. Adamu nodded, his expression serious. It's risky, but it could work. Kemi, do you think you can get us in? Kemi hesitated, her face pale. I can try. I still know some of the vendors who might be working there. They might let me bring you in. Before Diana could respond, Kemi reached for her phone and placed it on the table. Tea here is something else. I thought you should see this. She opened a video file, and the screen displayed a grainy recording. It showed Jide crouching in the backyard at night, a faint lantern casting eerie shadows on his face as he hurriedly dug a hole. He placed a tin into the ground, his eyes darting nervously toward the house before covering it with soil. Diana's breath hitched as she watched, her hands flying to her mouth. That's Jide, she whispered. He really buried something. Adamu leaned closer, his eyes narrowing. This is the proof we need. It corroborates everything you've said. Musa nodded. If we can retrieve that tin and tie it to Oladimeji's death, there'll be no denying their guilt. Diana exhaled shakily, her voice trembling. Be careful. If they catch you, they won't hesitate to kill you. We won't get caught. Remember, only a thief knows how to trail a fellow thief. We'll end this once and for all. The group sat in determined silence, the weight of the mission pressing down on them. The plan was risky, but with Kemi's video and their growing resolve, they had the tools they needed to bring the brothers to justice. The days leading up to the party were filled with careful planning. Kemi reached out to her contacts, securing uniforms for Adamu and Musa. The disguises were simple but effective, plain white shirts and black trousers, the typical attire of party servers. To complete the look, they each carried trays and wore caps that obscured their faces. Musa adjusted his cap in the cracked mirror at Diana's house. "How do I look?" "Like someone who might actually serve food for a living," Diana said with a faint smile. "But you'll need more than looks to pull this off. The guards will be watching everyone." Adamu tightened his shirt cuffs, his expression serious. "Then we'll have to be smarter than them. Stick to the kitchen until the party is in full swing. Once everyone is distracted, we'll slip out and head to the backyard." "And if you are caught?" Diana asked, her voice tight with worry. "Every day for the thief, but that day will be for us." "Don't worry, we won't," Adamu replied, though his tone betrayed his own uncertainty. Kemi chimed in, her voice steady despite her nerves. "I'll keep watch near the kitchen. If anything seems off, I'll warn you." On the evening of the party, the house was ablaze with light and activity. Cars lined the driveway, and the air buzzed with laughter and music. Guards stood at every entrance, their eyes scanning the crowd for any signs of trouble. Adamu and Musa arrived with Kemi, blending in seamlessly with the other servers carrying trays of drinks and hors d'oeuvres. The guards barely glanced at them as they entered through the kitchen door. The kitchen was a whirlwind of activity. Cooks shouted orders, pots clanged, and trays were piled high with food. Adamu and Musa grabbed trays and moved with practiced ease, careful not to draw attention to themselves. "Stick to the plan," Adamu whispered to Musa as they maneuvered through the crowded space. "Wait for the distraction." Musa nodded, his grip tightening on the tray he carried. "Let's hope the guests drink enough to keep the guards busy." As the party reached its peak, the atmosphere grew more chaotic. Guests laughed loudly, music blared from the speakers, and the guards seemed more relaxed, their focus divided by the lively crowd. Adamu and Musa exchanged a glance, their unspoken signal to move. They slipped out of the kitchen and into the hallway, their trays left behind on an empty counter. Kemi stayed near the doorway, her eyes darting nervously as she kept watch. "Hurry," she mouthed, gesturing toward the backyard. The two men moved cautiously through the house, their footsteps muffled by the thick carpets. They passed guests who paid them little mind, assuming they were part of the hired staff. Finally, they reached the back door. The soft glow of lamps illuminated the garden, where a few guards stood chatting near the fence. Adamu motioned for Musa to follow him as they crept along the edge of the yard, sticking to the shadows. "This is it," Musa whispered, pointing to the spot Kemi had described. The environment had grass grown all over, but not that spot. Adamu nodded, pulling out a small trowel from his pocket. "Keep watch. I'll dig." Adamu worked quickly, his hands moving with practiced efficiency as he dug into the soft soil. Each scrape of the trowel seemed deafening in the stillness of the garden. Musa stood nearby, his eyes darting between the guards and the house. "Hurry up," Musa hissed. "They're going to notice we're missing." "I am going as fast as I can," Adamu muttered, sweat beading on his forehead. Just as he unearthed a small metal tin, the sound of footsteps approached. Both men froze, their hearts pounding in their chests. "Hey!" a guard shouted. "What are you two doing over there?" Adamu grabbed the tin, shoving it into his pocket as Musa stepped forward, his hands raised in mock surrender. "We got lost," he said, his voice calm but nervous. "The kitchen's a maze. We were just trying to find our way back." The guard narrowed his eyes, stepping closer. "You don't look familiar. What's your name?" Before Musa could answer, a loud crash came from the house, followed by shouting. The guard turned his head, distracted by the commotion. Adamu seized the moment, grabbing Musa's arm. "Run!" he whispered fiercely. They bolted through the garden, ducking behind hedges and sprinting for the side gate. The sound of the party faded into the distance. As they disappeared into the night, the tin safely in their possession. Adamu and Musa sprinted through the dense forest, their breaths coming in ragged gasps as the sound of shouting guards drew closer. The moonlight barely pierced the canopy above, leaving them to stumble over roots and bushes as they fled. Musa clutched the small tin to his chest, his heart pounding with fear. "They're gaining on us," Musa hissed, glancing over his shoulder. "Just keep running," Adamu barked, pushing forward despite the burning in his legs. The sound of footsteps grew louder until the guards were only a few paces behind. A voice rang out, sharp and commanding, "Stop or we'll cut you down where you stand." Adamu skidded to a halt, realizing they were cornered. The guards stood in a semicircle, their weapons drawn, their faces twisted with anger. "Drop the tin," one of them snarled. Adamu and Musa exchanged a desperate glance, their hands raised in surrender. But before the guards could advance, the air around them grew icy, and an unnatural wind swept through the forest. The ground beneath the guards' feet began to shift, and their boots sank into the earth as if it had turned to quicksand. "What's happening?" one guard screamed, his voice trembling with panic. Adamu and Musa stood frozen in disbelief as the guards' screams filled the air. One by one, they fell silent as the supernatural force rooted them to the spot, unable to move. A low, eerie whisper echoed through the trees, "Run!" Snapping out of their stupor, Adamu grabbed Musa's arm, and they bolted into the shadows, their path clear. The haunting cries of the guards faded into the distance as they raced back toward Diana's house. By the time they reached Diana's house, the first rays of dawn were creeping over the horizon. Diana stood at the doorway, her expression a mixture of worry and relief as she ushered them inside. "Did you get it?" she asked breathlessly. Adamu nodded, pulling the tin from his pocket. "We have it, but we need to confirm what's inside." Musa wiped the sweat from his brow. "We're going back to Mama Ikiti. If anyone can prove this is poison, it's her." Diana hesitated, glancing at the horizon. "Be careful. If Jide and Leek realize it's missing, they'll come after you." Adamu met her gaze. "We'll be fine. Stay here and lock the doors." At Jide's residence, the party continued in full swing. Laughter and music filled the air as guests mingled, unaware of the storm brewing behind the scenes. In a quiet corner of the mansion, one of the guards approached Jide, his face pale and sweaty. "Sir, it here has been an incident," the guard stammered. Jide's smile vanished. "What kind of incident?" "It's the backyard, sir. The tinnet's gone." Jide froze, his knuckles whitening as he gripped the glass in his hand. "Gone? What do you mean, gone?" The guard swallowed hard. "Someone dug it up. It's missing." Jide slammed his glass onto the table, shattering it. He stormed through the house, his younger brother, Leek, trailing behind him. The two rushed to the backyard, where the disturbed earth confirmed the guard's report. "They've stolen it," Jide growled, his voice shaking with rage. "The thieves." Leek's face twisted in fury. "If they talk, we're finished. Do you understand? Find them. I don't care what it takes if they're caught. Bury them alive." The guards scattered, and though the party continued, Jide and Leek's unease was palpable. Their laughter was forced, their eyes darting nervously around the room. Long after the guests had left, Jide and Leek retreated to Jide's study, their anger giving way to fear. They paced the room, arguing in hushed tones about how to salvage the situation. "We need to find those thieves before they take this to anyone," Jide said, pouring himself a drink with shaking hands. "And what if they already have?" Leek countered. "What if?" He stopped mid-sentence, his eyes widening in terror as a cold gust of wind swept through the room. The lights flickered, and the shadows in the corner of the study seemed to move. "Who's there?" Jide demanded, his voice trembling. From the darkness, a familiar figure emerged. Oladimeji's ghost, his form faintly glowing, stood before them. His eyes burned with anger, and his voice rumbled like distant thunder. "You thought you could escape the truth." Jide and Leek screamed, stumbling over each other as they bolted from the room. They fled the mansion, their panicked cries echoing through the night. Baba Shango hut sat at the edge of the forest, its thatched roof barely visible under the moonlight. The air around the hut was thick with the scent of burning herbs and dried roots. Adamu knocked on the door, the sound echoing through the still night. Moments later, the door creaked open, revealing Baba Shango. His sharp eyes scanned the group, lingering on the satchel Adamu held. "What brings thieves and widow to my doorstep at this hour?" he asked, his voice as rough as gravel. "We need your help," Adamu said, bowing his head. He pulled out the vial and the note, holding them out to him. "This was buried behind Jide's house. We think it's poison." Baba Shango's eyes narrowed as she took the items. He motioned for them to follow him inside, where shelves lined with jars of powders, liquids, and dried plants loomed over the small room. The herbalist set the vial on the table, lighting a small lamp before opening it. He dipped a thin metal rod into the liquid and held it over the flame. The substance hissed and bubbled, releasing a foul-smelling smoke. "It's as I suspected," Baba Shango said after a long pause. "This is a rare toxin derived from Akara root, deadly in even the smallest doses." Diana gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "That's what they used on my husband." Baba Shango nodded. "It's unmistakable. This is the work of someone who knows their poisons well. I'm glad you are making progress, and hopefully soon you will find redemption." The morning sun filtered through the cracks in Diana's modest house, casting faint beams of light on the group huddled around the wooden table. The atmosphere was thick with tension as Adamu placed the vial and the note carefully on the table. "This is it," Musa said, breaking the silence. "We've got the proof, but how do we use it? Jide and Leek will deny everything." Diana leaned forward, her hands trembling slightly. "It's not enough to show this to the elders. They'll need something more concrete, something public that can't be ignored." Adamu nodded. "We need to create a situation where they can't wiggle out of it, something that forces them to slip up." Kemi, sitting quietly until now, spoke up. "What about a confrontation? If you corner them in front during a gathering, they might get nervous and reveal something." Diana frowned. "Jide and Leek are cunning. They won't admit to anything unless they're backed into a corner." Adamu's eyes narrowed as an idea began to form. "Then we'll make them think they've already been exposed. If they believe the truth is about to come out, they might panic and incriminate themselves." Musa looked skeptical. "And how do we do that?" Adamu smirked. "We set a trap." The group decided to use the town's natural grapevine against Jide and Leek. Kemi volunteered to start spreading rumors hinting that new evidence had surfaced about Oladimeji's death. As Kemi walked through the bustling market that afternoon, she stopped at various stalls, her voice loud enough to be overheard. "Did you hear? They say someone found something buried behind the old house, something about poison." The once respected brothers were now the center of public scrutiny, their reputations crumbling under the weight of the allegations. The rumor spread like wildfire. By evening, whispers about the discovery had reached every corner of the village. Jide and Leek, upon hearing the news, grew visibly agitated. Guards were seen coming and going from their residence, and their usual confidence seemed shaken. "They're taking the bait," Adamu said, watching from a distance. "Now, we wait for the next move." The morning sun filtered through the thin curtains in Diana's modest living room, bathing the room in a soft golden glow. She sat at the edge of the worn couch, absently tracing the fabric with her fingers, her thoughts miles away. The events of the past few days had been a whirlwind, and though they were inching closer to the truth, the weight of it all bore heavily on her. The sharp trill of her cell phone broke the silence, startling her. She reached for it hesitantly, glancing at the unfamiliar number displayed on the screen. Her heart quickened as she debated whether to answer. Finally, she pressed the green button and brought the phone to her ear. "Hello?" Her voice wavered slightly. "Diana," a familiar voice replied, smooth and measured. It was Leek. "It's been a while." Diana's grip tightened on the phone. "What do you want, Leek?" Leek chuckled lightly, though there was a hint of unease in his tone. No need for hostility. I was calling to invite you to the reopening of Oladimeji's auto shop. It's happening tomorrow evening. A big event, lots of important people will be there. Diana frowned, suspicion lacing her voice. Why now? After all this time, why reopen it? Because it's time to honor Oladimeji's legacy, Leek replied smoothly. And as his wife, you should be there. It wouldn't feel right without you. Diana's jaw clenched, her instincts screaming that there was more to this invitation than Leek was letting on. Still, she forced her tone to remain calm. I'll think about it. Good, Leek said, his voice overly pleasant. We'll see you there. As the line went dead, Diana sat frozen, her mind racing. Something about the call felt off, but one thing was clear. This was no ordinary invitation.
Episode 3 drops 6 p.m. tomorrow. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out.